Hello and welcome to the Allison Supply Chains podcast. This is the March 2025 episode covering the latest news concerning third-party cyber risk management and digital supply chain risk. Each month we find the 6 most interesting stories, maybe 5 most interesting stories today to discuss. If you like what you hear or prefer to read over listening, you can also find these stories in print form. Join over 13,600 other readers by subscribing to the Allison Supply Chains newsletter over on LinkedIn today. All right, let's get started. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, principal researcher of the Defenders Initiative, and joining me is Alexandre Sieira, the CTO and co-founder of Tenshi. How are you?
And given all the news bombardment we're getting right now, so many weird news, I think I'm doing okay.
And that kind of leads us into our vibes segment here, which is the balkanization of the global economy. We're seeing a lot of new tariffs go in. The U.S. still doesn't have strong privacy legislation, at least not across the U.S. And we're seeing a lot of companies, kind of ignoring a lot of that, particularly with AI. When you have to train AI, we're seeing a lot of terms and conditions change, right? Where I'm trying to think of the example that popped up the other day, but basically you can't opt out of training anymore. I think it was Alexa. I think the Alexa
Yes.
devices are going to be listening all the time, and you can't not have the recordings sent to the cloud
Yes.
anymore. That used to be an option, but now it's not because AI is hungry and it needs to eat, so it needs to be fed.
Yeah, I feel like people need to remember that even though companies are doing business, like people are doing business with other people, and there needs to be trust involved when you build a supply chain, and the country you're in, your legislative infrastructure, the stability of rules and norms, things that are not even written down, impact that trust. So we're kind of seeing those relationships being strained and that trust be questioned on defense, which has direct impacts for cybersecurity, and on business, which means it could have an impact for third-party risk management, right? Meaning, if you are in Europe right now, I'm seeing a lot of people discussing, hey, do we really want to be like governments and companies? Do we want to be this dependent on US-based cloud providers, AI providers? Do we need our own options and alternatives? Do we need to go back to on-prem and use more open source technologies? Those discussions are happening and they're not good for anyone. The fact that they're happening is we're taking a couple of steps back into a lot of productivity gains and economic gains that the entire world benefited from, unfortunately. So let's hope this goes away. But it's a trend to keep an eye out of, especially if you're into TPCRM, making sure that it's not only about data residency for GDPR, say, but the overall relationship between those companies, the possibilities of tariffs or even non-economic rules that might limit the amount of business you do with companies. Like you really want to be looking at who do I depend on? What are my single points of failure across that potentially strained divide over the Atlantic? If you are in Europe or especially, right?
Yeah, and we saw some of that even before all this going on with Germany, saying certain government organizations can't use Microsoft 365 because they don't meet their stringent security requirements, right? So it's a reduction in choice in the market, right? When this kind of thing happens. So I agree. It hurts the whole market, I think, when this kind of stuff happens.
And it will hit the largest providers in cloud and AI are US based, and they're going to be hit if people start adopting alternatives. They're going to be the biggest, the ones to lose the most out of this. It's a hard switch, but if it does start to happen, they're the ones that are going to be losing, right? So the US market will be losing essentially.
Yeah. So hopefully next month we have better vibes, but those are the vibes right now. And
Yes.
on to the stories. This first story is I followed it pretty closely the first couple days that information started to come out. But the Bybit heist, I did some research and found it is tied for the largest heist, theft of financial whatever, like not even just cryptocurrency, but any kind of heist whatsoever. And it's tied for a crazy heist where gold bars were physically stolen from Tajikistan. Like, some people in the government were uh, uh, moving them into Dubai. So, like, that's where we are with this. No bank robbery, no heist of art or money or anything else has come even close to $1.5 billion, which is the amount of cryptocurrency of Ethereum, I think specifically, that North Korea
Hmm.
made off with when they Bybit was transferring money from a cold wallet to warm or hot. I forget what it is, and they used a third party to do that. And that third party was hacked, and software code was just waiting for this to happen, and managed to steal the money. And the amazing thing is that Bybit was able to just cover it. They said, "Yeah, we've got 20 billion in reserves. This is covered." And then he put out like $150 million bounty for anyone that could help them recover any of that money. So wild story here.
Wild, yeah. And the thing that I want to emphasize, there's so much to talk about here, right? The one thing that's not directly related to TPCRM that I'd like to talk about is how just North Korea is funding itself. I remember seeing figures as high as like 40% of like the government's budget is being funded by cybercrime, and over half of their like weapons program, right, is being funded
Yeah.
by cybercrime, which is just incredible, right? And this will increase those percentages like tremendously, right? Because it's been attributed to them, and they're busy already laundering that money, going through mixers, and they have this nailed down to a science to make sure it's not traceable and recoverable. But like a tiny amount has been recovered so far, and that's one of the main benefits of cryptocurrencies is that it's write only, right? You can't revert a
Yeah.
transaction, right? So once it's gone, it's gone. There's very
Yeah.
little recourse in what you can do. You can see where it's going, but then mixers and other techniques help hide that and obfuscate that. But recovering this is super hard, unlike the traditional banking system where you have a better chance of doing this. And it's one of the things that makes this attractive to a country like North Korea. You wanted to comment or something?
Yeah, just that to your point that this is how cryptocurrency was designed, and it's one of the biggest issues with cryptocurrency is like you hear all these stories about people with a hard drive somewhere or a flash drive somewhere with crypto, with 8 Bitcoin on it that they can't recover, right? And there's whole services dedicated to recovering people's cryptocurrency, to doing forensics on drives and stuff like that. And it's just wild to think that we're pushing for this to take over for fiat currency when there's no consumer protection, there's no undo button, there's no when your credit card gets stolen, if there's transactions from the person that stole it, you have protections there. Here, there's just nothing.
Yeah.
It's your best bet is that wherever they transfer the money, uh, law enforcement, legal and law enforcement, can seize that, can get it frozen, can get it reversed. But that's only if it's not transferred, or that's only if it's transferred to an exchange that there is some, legal or law enforcement presence that can affect that.
I know there are countries that are safe havens for criminal activity, like Russia doesn't go after criminals. They're not targeting Russian companies. Probably won't do the same. Like also won't go after the proceeds of cybercrime if they're going into the Russian economy, things like that. So that's what North Korea is doing. They're using the cryptocurrency to buy things from China, from Russian, from other countries or organizations that are more shady, to because that's one of their only sources of actual value, right? They don't have exports. They don't like it's
Right.
weird. But from the
Yeah,
TPCRM angle, go ahead, sorry.
they're so heavily sanctioned, they don't have a whole lot of choices. So, backed into a corner, this is what they do.
Right? So it becomes actual state funding enterprise. The thing that I wanted to emphasize here is that this happened through a third party, right? So
Yeah.
Bybit as far as I can tell, seem to be trying to do the right thing. So they were stalling their cold wallets. Like when they're not moving money around, the funds are stored in cold wallets that are offline on physical devices. It's more like smart contracts and actual wallets that are just storing the coins, so to speak. But still, they're being kept offline to protect them. And it's like a multi-party process where multiple people have to agree to a transaction happening to move it, say, from the cold wallets, as you said, to the hot wallets, where it can actually be part of the live transactions that are going on the exchange. And so, ev- and so people were doing things kind of the right way at Bybit. And their provider is called Safe. They have a product called Safe Wallet, which is a hardware wallet that was used for this, and a process that gets that multiple acknowledgement for any transactions. And a couple of things went wrong here. So the way this happened is seems like North Korea, it was very targeted attack. They found out a developer that, quote, was one of the very few personnel that had higher access in order to perform their duties, meaning a developer that was probably had like admin level privileges on their production environment. And whoever doesn't have any of those throws the first stone here. But still, like you want to separate developers from production access as much as possible. They say one of the very few. How few? Like what percentage of their developers had access to production? In any case, North Korea found one, compromised their Mac, essentially their Mac laptop or workstation, and then they pivoted and used that developer's access to go into the production AWS environment. And credit to Safe here, they were using 2FA, right? So so they had to use the active sessions that the developer was using. The North Koreans even tried adding additional 2FA devices that they control, so they could have unfettered access to AWS, and they were unable to because the developer didn't have that privilege, right? So in a sense, they were following best practices. They were using temporary sessions. They were using 2FA. They didn't allow people to willy-nilly add additional 2FA devices. The one thing here is they missed an opportunity because if someone tried to enroll additional 2FA devices, right, that could have triggered a detection. So a missed opportunity here. But hey, again, anyone that has perfect detection, throw the first stone. And what happened was the North Koreans then wrote like bespoke code that would only if the wallets from Bybit were doing a transaction. So they changed the code that was stored on an S3 bucket and was being downloaded by the hardware wallets to process those transactions. And they had an if there. If it's one of those accounts, one of those smart contracts that we know belong to Bybit, make them behave differently. And the thing that really hurt Bybit, and it was a design problem from the Safe wallet, is if you're doing transactions between wallets, their UI will tell you you're going from wallet A to wallet B, and it's easier to identify what is going on. But if it's smart contracts, the thing that's displayed on the UI for you to validate that the transaction you're approving on the device or on their software is actually the one you wanted to approve, it's like a base 64 encoded blob that you would have had to copy and paste somewhere else and the code and interpret because those things are super complex. So you're like doing appending code to an existing smart contract to change the way it works because those things include each other. And it's super complicated and complexity is the enemy of security. So the very targeted attack, even though people were doing the basics, they were compromised. But at the end of the day here, it was a critical third party to Bybit, Safe. And the thing that got them was endpoint security and cloud security. That was the thing that really got them in the end. And the lesson here is how seriously is your TPCRM program taking those disciplines, endpoint and cloud security, and privileges, the privileges that that developer had should have been reviewed and minimized. They have done that since the incident, so they could have done it before. Again, hindsight is 2020, but that's a lesson learned here. How are your tools and how is your program, dear listener, looking at those aspects from your third parties, your critical third parties? Are they going beyond just the external attack surface? That is the question I invite everyone to answer, thinking about the largest cyber heist of all time.
Largest heist, period. Yeah, you can delete cyber from that statement. But it's
Yes.
still true.
Yes.
Something as an industry, I think we're going to have to. We're working on it right now. Is the idea that you can just take logged in sessions and move them from one device to another. So we're starting to see a lot of focus on tying those logged in sessions to devices. To where I can't just grab that OAuth key from your machine and put it on my machine and bypass 2FA, MFA. But yeah, right now it's still possible with a lot of things, and that's it's huge right now. I saw Unit 42, Palo Alto's research division, said that info stealers on Macs were up 101%, something like that, in the second half of 2024. So, stealing credentials from Macs is a very popular thing right now. We've never seen Macs so heavily targeted, but the people with stuff to steal with high levels of privileges like using Macs. So that's where the attackers go. That's what they're focused on.
Developers, data scientists, North Korea, and other attackers have been targeting them for a while. Security researchers, and a lot of those folks use Macs. So you're absolutely right. And in the case here where they actually compromised the workstation, it would be a hindrance to attackers, but it would have stopped them, even if you tied the sessions to the machine, because they could just proxy their access through the developer's machine anyway. Right? They had full control over it, apparently. So, but yeah, that's a good control. That's a good control against leaked session tokens, against leaked credentials. It's going to make initial access brokers and info stealer sales of credentials a lot harder if everyone adopted that.
Yeah. All right. So moving on to story 2, we've got. So this is from Cowbell Cyber, which is an interesting company, saying that supply chain based cyber attacks have surged over 400%, another huge percentage over the number 100 for you. And third party risk is now dominant in cyber insurance claims. So that's very interesting. Like I think we knew. Well, I mean, here we tend to be hyper focused on third party incidents and things like that. But it's not just us. It really is where attackers are focusing, because they get more bang for their buck, right? Instead of hacking one company, I can attack a third party, a provider, and get access to all their customers. Be they, they might have 20 customers, they might have 20,000 customers, but it gives me a lot more flexibility and choice as an attacker.
Microsoft released a report recently talking about a well-known threat actor that's doing exactly that. They're picking that as one of their preferred techniques because it's a force multiplier. And the cyber insurance companies, I think, are a reliable source because they are literally like they have skin in the game of getting it right. What are the main things that increase a company's cyber risk? Like they really like lose money if they bet on the wrong things and they ask their insureds to fix the wrong things. They're going to have a higher claims rate and they're going to lose more money, essentially, right? They make money if you pay for the insurance and don't make a claim and don't suffer a breach in this case, right? So that's what they're banking on. And if you look at Resilience, which is another cyber insurance company, they've been publishing reports and saying exactly the same thing. The leading cause of claims is not that the cyber insurance policy holder itself was attacked, but one of their third parties was attacked and they were indirectly impacted. So this have been very consistent even across different insurers. And there are a few things here that I found was super interesting in that report that I wanted to highlight and maybe discuss, because I love the data-driven discussion, right? Being able to tie this to actual ground truth instead of just opinion and expertise. And it's so sobering, right? So the first thing is that I think flies in the face of a lot of common sense and even some scoring methodologies for security scoring companies is larger businesses, particularly those with annual revenues exceeding $50 million, face significantly higher cyber risks. These organizations experience cyber incidents 2.5 times more frequently. So you would expect, with common sense, the larger companies that have a larger security budget, that have larger teams, that have the top shelf tools, would be more secure. And actually what they're saying here is they experience cyber incidents 2.5 times more likely than smaller companies. And they give us the exact number. Like businesses with annual revenues under $10 million experience only 0.4 times, so 40% as frequent incidents as the average claims frequency, right? So this is interesting. I think a lot of the reasoning here, the rationale behind this is you are a larger target. The larger your company is, the more interesting you become to cybercrime, for example, because you have deeper pockets. They can extort you for more money if you have more money, right? And I also think that the larger your company gets, the more likely you are to have like legacy infrastructure that you never got to update or decommission. The bigger your attack surface will be, not just the external attack surface, but attack surface in general. You have more people that can be phished. You have more endpoints that can be compromised, right? And the likelihood that you're able to keep them all homogeneously secure goes down dramatically as the complexity and the size of your infrastructure grows. But the common sense, again, the larger company is more secure. And so I see that reflected in TPCRM where people are scared of hiring the smaller vendor.
Yeah.
Maybe that's
Maybe
not
they're not a
necessary.
target.
Maybe they're not targeted as frequently, right? So that's something that I found super interesting here. I don't know if you have any comments on
Yeah.
that, but I have a couple of more things that I found was interesting.
Yeah, I mean they're like you said, they're going where the money's at. You know, the reason they're hitting max is that's where the credentials are. The reason they're hitting businesses with annual revenues exceeding 50 million is they would prefer to get a ransom of 7 or 8 digits, and you can't get that from a company that doesn't have that money to pay. So
Yeah.
it's as simple as that. Yeah.
The other thing they say that reminds me of our mutual friend Wendy Nather is while smaller businesses face fewer attacks, they often lack the resources to implement robust cybersecurity measures or recover quickly from an incident. So the impact of a successful attack on small business can be extremely severe. This sounds to me like something that, again, Wendy Nather with the concept of the cybersecurity poverty line, or Kimberly Price from Zactic Security has been talking about a lot as well. How difficult it is, sometimes impossible it is for those smaller companies to defend themselves properly. So if something does occur, and for example, if they become a target, not because they themselves are attracted, but because they become an into a larger company because they are a third party to a large enterprise, then you have this problem where they don't have the capacity to defend themselves. And that's where we feel like the larger companies helping the smaller companies they depend on is the only path forward, right? In making sure you're able to defend yourself. Because there are no large companies I've ever talked to that don't depend on a few critical small businesses, right? They're more
Yeah.
nimble, that maybe have a hold on a particular technology or a particular market. And this is the reality. You have to face it and deal with it. Just pretending you can pick a more secure vendor or punish them into submission is not going to work. Like the money is simply not there for some of those smaller companies, right?
This episode is brought to you by Zanshin, the innovative SaaS solution for third-party cyber risk management that's disrupting the market with a cooperative, continuous, and comprehensive approach. Zanshin is the first product to allow first parties to gain true visibility into their third parties in a non-intrusive way. Gain a deep understanding of how secure your third parties are in key areas like cloud security, endpoint security, identity and access management, and at-risk encryption. Visit Tenchi at tenchisecurity.com to schedule a demo or free trial and see for yourself how enterprise customers are able to reduce third-party risk by 80% or more in just a few weeks. All right, moving on to story number 3. So this is good news. It's nice to have good news. I remember talking about this on another podcast, but authorities stopped 500 ransomware attacks since 2021 and more SEC cybersecurity disclosure analysis. And this is from Jeff Stone at Bloomberg. And it's interesting. So this is from last October. And I've actually seen the numbers now. We have the numbers on 2024, and the payments to ransomware groups went down. So I think 2023 was the first year it exceeded $1 billion globally, and now it's gone back down. It's like 40% less. So the the guess here was that it was going to exceed 1 billion, but it ended up not. And 4.3 billion dollars of recovered cryptocurrency here too. So like I was mentioning earlier, there are opportunities if you have the ability to reach an exchange. If it's within legal or law enforcement reach, we can get some of these transactions reversed and actually recover that crypto.
I feel like a lot of that recovery also happened through either law enforcement compromising the endpoints of the attackers and then stealing
Sure.
their
Yeah.
wallets from under them, or seizing even hardware wallets or computers that have the wallets in them when people are arrested. Because this is a welcome change as well. We've seen arrests, right? We're seeing, so this is super welcome. This is amazing news. Like, ransomware is a scourge, and so indictments, you love to see that. Arrests, you love to see that. Operational disruptions, even for like domain takedowns, seizure of equipment, seizure of domains. This all becomes an irritant. It becomes a productivity break that you're imposing all those on those gangs, so they make less money. They're less successful. You can disrupt the trust that they have because those ecosystems are very specialized. You have the initial access brokers, you have the developers of the ransomware software, you have the actual affiliates that are doing the attacks and using the software by using the initial access and asking for the ransom. So all sorts of things that law enforcement and even intelligence agencies can do to slow this down. I love to see that it's going on. Arresting people is traditionally hard. Like you see a lot of those people in places that don't extradite, or like Russia, that actively protects them, right? If they're not attacking friendly companies in
But when
friendly
they go on
countries,
vacation to Portugal,
or Spain, or yes. So
yeah,
so that's when people make mistakes. They become overconfident and they
that's
go
where they
to
get picked up.
places that do have extradition treaties with the U.S. and other countries, and so that's when they run into problems, right? The thing that I would like to say here is, like, remember your von Clausewitz: the longer you engage with an enemy, the more that it adapts to your tactics. So
Yeah.
I think part of this was the victims starting adapting. So the companies that can do it have been, for years now, improving their backup infrastructure, making sure they have offline backups. It can't be ransomware, because if your systems are ransomware and your backups are ransomed as well, you're in trouble, right? You have to
Yeah.
pay. But if you do have backups and you have the tested that you can back up all of that environment in time, blah blah blah. So people have become better at this. So that's part of it. Um, and that law enforcement absolutely has been doing a great job, and you love to see it and hope they do it more. But now we have to wait for the criminals. They will adapt as well, and this will be
Yeah.
again cat and mouse, and we might see a resurgence, and they change their tactics, and let's see.
Yeah, that was my only leaving comment here, is that anytime we reduce their success, they look to pivot, they look to innovate, and now thanks to all this ransomware, they have R&D budgets, they have money to spend on figuring out, okay, what comes after ransomware, or maybe some different approach to ransomware. So that's the only thing that makes me nervous is once we start winning, they start looking at a new place to move to, maybe one that we're not prepared for.
I think the rise of BEC, business email compromise, and the rise of romance scams, aka pig butchering, which is kind of a demeaning term to victims, but I think is already a sign of that. They are finding, like, if governments are being more forceful about defending their economic interests and their organizations, they're going after individual citizens. And maybe the government either can't handle the volume or is not as interested in going after them. But if you look at how romance scam is going on some countries in Asia, right? Again, if you look at, I forget the name of the country right now, but there's one country in Asia right
Thailand.
now. No, it's not. It's on the border of Thailand, actually. But um, anyway, it's gonna come back to me. I'm getting old and forgetful. And,
Cambodia, Vietnam, Laos.
yeah, and
One of these.
no, but the thing they're doing is, like, again, this is a significant part of their export and GDP now, romance scams. They have
Oh,
huge
wow.
compounds with people that are working like on essentially as slaves. They're being forced into working doing this.
Right.
They're pretending to be hiring people, and then they kidnap them and they force them to do romance scams. So even the perpetrators are victims as well. If you're talking about the people that are actually engaging with you, and it's just human suffering all around. The other thing I'm going to comment here, and going back to the vibes section, is there's a lot of cuts going on in the U.S. government right now. This was about the Department of Homeland Security and refocusing on things like immigration and other topics, regardless of whether you agree or disagree with this. My concern is, will this pressure be kept up, right? As workforce reductions and refocusing goes on, we might see the pressure be lifted somewhat, which is, if that happens, it will be unfortunate because this is awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. It would be terrible to lose that momentum. If government agencies are told to leave Russia alone, right? All right, going on to story number 4. This was a really interesting one. So, Watchtower is a somewhat infamous organization that does some research that kind of requires the way they go about it. They actually do it for real, right? So they're going out taking S3 buckets that have been abandoned. And the way this works is interesting, and it's kind of shocking to me that nobody's really well, it's not that nobody's noticed it. There have been other cases where people have called this out, but it hasn't really become a best practice yet. But say you create an S3 bucket, you create an application to read and write from that S3 bucket, but you use the actual domain name that AWS gives you, which is company name S3 bucket dot Amazon, AWS dot Amazon.com or whatever. Um, if you then delete that S3 bucket, but you still have people using that application, anyone else can come over and register that bucket name. And now they control whatever that application is calling in looking for. You can now hand them a piece of malware, if they're doing updates from that S3 bucket, or if they're loading configuration files from that S3 bucket. So this was wild because they actually did it. They actually registered hundreds of S3 buckets. I think they spent a total of like $400 to do this. In this particular story, this is Solomon Kapholz at Cloud Pro that wrote this up. But the Watchtower write up is very extensive, and it's worth a read. But very simple attack here. Just taking advantage of abandoned resources that anyone can pick up and run with. So, just to wrap it all up, I think the recommendation here is don't use the S3 bucket name. Use your own domain names within the application. That way nobody can swoop in and take that from you.
Absolutely. Just going back to the previous story, Myanmar is the country I was trying to remember.
Myanmar. Okay.
But Laos and Cambodia, which you mentioned, are also involved. Going back to this,
Okay.
so this is a classic pattern of attacks. Anytime you have a global namespace with identifier reuse, you are liable to get that problem. Like someone was using an identifier, and it becomes widespread, that use. And then this is, for some reason, freed and can be used by an attacker. They can kind of impersonate you because people trust that if I talk to this resource, I'm talking to a particular company or a particular software. And then it comes down. And people have been doing that with domain names since forever. People have been doing that with software packages on package repositories like npm or pypy or whatever it
Yeah.
is. And so this is just another example of why, again, you either avoid doing global namespaces with identifier reuse, or you'd have to really look at those previous examples. How have people handled that on those other contexts? Because they've been through already, and we keep failing to learn from those experiences. So, for example, one thing AWS could do is, as long as that AWS account exists, even if they delete a bucket, that same name cannot be reused. It would be a simple change for them to do, and it would have prevented this. And it's what some package managers do, for example, right? Or
Oh,
provide
interesting. Okay.
it would be, you could, like, instead of deleting, you kind of decommission it, but you don't free it for reuse, is the point, right? Um, and so it would be a change that AWS could do. It's a design problem with S3. And again, S3 is probably the oldest, or one of the oldest services in AWS. So we understand it was in AWS's infancy. And doing a backwards incompatible change like this one is going to be a nightmare. But it's something I would really think about if I was working at AWS today. Um, the more practical thing here is what you just said. Like, we see a lot of people using object storage in general, not just S3. S3 just happens to be the more popular one, but like blob storage in Azure or cloud storage in Google, and I'm sure other cloud providers like IBM Cloud and Oracle Cloud have their equivalents, which I don't know the names of because I don't know every cloud provider. But they're being used like a poor man's CDN. Like, it's a way to publish things that is easy for people to fetch globally. So you see software libraries that are downloading content or even more code from that, like the way web pages will load JavaScript. Um, and don't do that. Use a proper CDN, as you said. Register a domain name that you're going to keep renewing, right? And then you can point the domain name to a web version of that S3 bucket. And if you tomorrow decide to not use an S3 bucket and use something else, or if you want to decommission the S3 bucket, but to keep the domain name registered to your company, again, that problem doesn't happen either, right? Because the external software references, the connections, the software downloads won't be tied to something as low level as an S3 bucket name. That's the architectural mistake. And it's something that our product will help check, for example. It's one of the things we check. Even if the bucket is properly configured, and like it's read only, it doesn't allow you to list objects, but if it's being public, we're going to recommend, it's not a critical finding, we're going to recommend don't do that. Use, for example, CloudFront instead, which is AWS's native CDN, right? And hide it behind a proper domain name. You want to expose your internals like this, right? It's just bad architecture practice, and it leads to security problems like this one that Watchtower, very, very intelligent, wrote about. Kudos to them, by the way. Great job here on this research. It's scary as hell. Everyone should read this.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of reminds me of the recommendation not to, for a lot of people leaving Twitter or other social networks. The recommendation is not to completely delete your account, because then anyone else can come in, pick up that account name. It becomes available again, and they can impersonate you. So we see this issue other places also. And kudos, I didn't know the proper name for this. Global namespaces with identifier reuse. That is the.
I don't know if that's a thing. That's how I named it, but I think it makes sense.
It's certainly easier than the 2 minutes it took me to explain it, right? And it makes sense.
It's the kind of architectural decision and the way that your third party uses the cloud that is non-obvious. Like, this is not just a public S3 bucket problem, right? Where you have sensitive data just being exposed without a password, but it's the sort of thing you should be talking about, again, especially with your critical third parties. Going back to the Bybit story, the thing that the North Koreans did was precisely change code that was being stored on an S3 bucket and being downloaded by the hardware wallet or the software that did the multi-party validation to run as part of that a smart contract change, right? So again, people were able to write to the S3 bucket. So this is a pattern that people are using. They have to be very conscious about how they use it. And again, when TPCRM is involved, if you're looking at a third party that's running in cloud environments, that is something that I think few people would look into because they won't even notice that their third parties are doing that. But if you have automated checking, you can. I'm going to give one other example of something along those same lines that a lot of people don't discuss, right? But metadata on cloud environments. When you're configuring a cloud environment, you can give whatever name you want to S3 bucket, to your database, to a VPC like a network, to an EC2 instance or an instance, or you can tag it using arbitrary text, like you're choosing names essentially and values. And sometimes people make the horrible, horrible mistake of putting sensitive information there. They would put the names of people. They would put the names of the organizations that are their customers. They will
In
put
the object names.
in the object names, saying, "Hey, just our team can see that." No, no. First of all, the cloud provider doesn't protect that data. If you look at, for example, AWS's legal wording, the names of your resources is not even considered your property. It's considered AWS property. Like if you put PII on a resource name, it's no longer yours. It's as if you published it on GitHub and put it on open source license on it, right? It's you're giving up that information. Plus, anyone that you bring in to help you with your cloud environment, if you have a CSPM solution, if you have a cloud backup solution, if you bring in external consultants to help you reduce your cloud costs, if you're going through an audit, all of those people will be able to see that data. So if you consider it sensitive, don't do that, right? Again, all those things should be named like UUIDs or random strings, and you map it somehow to which customer this belongs to. For example, if you're creating a bucket for each customer, don't name that customer X. Like give it a random name.
Some kind of tokenization, right? Yeah, the concept of tokenization. Yeah.
Precisely, because if not, you're going to be exposing that sensitive information everywhere. Again, that's a very insecure cloud architecture decision that is super hard to validate, but it can be very consequential if a critical third party is doing that.
Yeah. Yeah, some good points there. I'd never really thought about that before. But yeah, some consultant has run a scout scan and has the names of all those things on their laptop, and then it goes who knows where.
Firewall rule documentation that says this is Adrian Sanabria's access from his home. This is his home IP address that's PII right there. Anyway, I'm sorry.
I think that's all the time we've got for this month. Alexandre, thank you for joining me today.
It was a pleasure. See everyone next month.
If you liked what you heard and you're on a platform where you can like, subscribe, or leave a comment, please do so. We'd love to get your feedback. Stay safe and stay vigilant, and we'll see you again next month.